Thank you very much for coming.
We're here.
You can all talk now, that's great. All three of them, you can see the job titles they've got. These are three people who all care a lot about AI. They're all working with AI, but very much in the context that they are kind of editorial leaders as well as technology buffs within their news organizations. So we're going to start with some sort of bigger picture stuff about where do we think we are. We're now, over 3 years since ChatGPT was launched. It's been a kind of breathless 3 years, but we are starting to see real effects, both positive ones and some slightly more hairy examples of use of AI. So I'm going to start off by asking you what kind of year that you've had in regard to AI. And I'm going to start with you, Chris, please.
I guess the main thing for me this year is a kind of realization that whilst generative AI might kill us, building a generative AI product is not going to save us. Right? So to be clear, I'm still deeply interested in how we can apply this in journalism. But what I hope is this year is starting to see people in our situations move from playing with the technology initially to try and understand it into a more kind of considered, what is the journalistic innovation here? Because I think we've all done quite a lot of similar things, which makes a lot of sense, right? People have experimented with chatbots, summarization, fuzzy search in various environments and things like that. But right now, what I am interested in is that bit of what we bring to it that is interesting. I think also there is that general kind of what will save us in an environment where, especially in Google search, a lot of the answers people will get will be pretty good, albeit with a lot of errors in, potentially, right? But with clear upsides compared to some of what we do. And I think that will be less about, again, necessarily using AI and more about how do we project out to our readers what values we bring that are different to this, right? And is our journalism as connected to our audience as it possibly can be? But I think the biggest thing that I've kind of been focusing on is education internally. And I think in rooms like this, there's lots of people here who are very well informed about how this technology works. You know, we've all thought about it a lot. We attempt to use it ourselves, I suspect, as much as we possibly can. But today, there are still a lot of people in newsrooms who don't do that and don't necessarily understand some of the most basic things behind it. So, you know, a lot of people have done training, but we've just rolled out a kind of hour of video-based, kind of bite-sized mandatory training at The Guardian. And the main thing I'm focusing on is a very low level of AI literacy. You know, do you understand that if you go to ChatGPT search, it doesn't have access to the whole internet? Things that are as literally as basic as that. Do you understand what the probabilistic approach is and how that might change the way you talk to a machine? Because my personal feeling is, even today, my least favourite brand of AI journalism is still very prevalent. The one where somebody asks it a question, it makes a mistake, and then the journalist asks it why it's made the mistake, and then has a long conversation with it, and then writes a piece about how they were gaslit by an AI, right? That worries me, because it's kind of funny, but at the same time, it represents a deep misunderstanding of what the hell you're dealing with. And therefore, it underlines our journalistic imperative to understand this stuff before we talk about it.
Yeah. We'll go on to the more sort of, if you like, positive aspects in a second, but just to follow up on something you said at the very beginning, you said, we know that AI might kill us. And I'm assuming you don't mean literally killer robots, But
No,
you mean that there is a sort of existential context to this for journalism?
Yeah, on top of the narrative that we all know from things like the Reuters Institute Digital News Report, direct traffic is difficult already. There are lots of competing platforms. There are lots of excellent alternatives to traditional media, potentially, or also some bad alternatives which people still go to. But on top of that, if you then layer in the problem of Gen AI, particularly being integrated, frankly, in Google search, but really being intermediated on other platforms and devices as well, it represents a significant problem to our entire industry. There's no question about it.
And are you feeling that at The Guardian at the moment in terms of traffic and so on, or is it still?
This is where it gets a bit nuanced, right? There's a lot of people writing about how their traffic is, they've dropped 60% from Google. But right now, just to make things a bit more complicated, my view is I'm not sure any of us can definitely tell that yet, right? I mean, Google search is notoriously volatile anyway. The news is notoriously volatile. There are many core search updates. So definitely ascribing whatever drops we're seeing to AI mode, I don't think we can do conclusively yet. But one thing's for sure, the decisions that Google make in particular over how much further they integrate these things over the next 2 years are probably going to make that a bit clearer.
Okay. So, Nathalie, obviously, the BBC, you've got, on the one hand, you've got a relatively large resource. You're a big organisation and you've been doing some really interesting, both practical work, testing and research around AI, but also, of course, you have a special responsibility as a public service broadcaster, as you are only too well aware. How has it been this year for you?
I'd say for us it's been a year of kind of great momentum, and partly in news because we actually started a dedicated News AI team, full-time working on this. We've got 6 people. We've brought in someone who's really experienced in AI from Swedish radio, so really has rolled out big AI initiatives, and that has been a step change for us. I think we've also seen a lot of the pilots we started a while ago becoming successful and now integrating. So there are things like we have a new language service. We have Polish, which is enabled by AI translation. We have some really interesting pilots around sport, turning text into short podcasts. And we've done things the other way around as well. So, turning audio into text. So we've been experimenting a lot. It's really working, I would say. All of it, I should add, with human intervention. We really do believe in human editors. But I think the most interesting thing to me has been seeing the kind of switch in the newsroom, perhaps, of how there's still an education issue, and there's still a lot of people who kind of are very, very start of their journey, let's say, but also people coming up with some amazing ideas and actually, coming up with proof of concepts themselves and coming to with like, I've got this idea, what about it? And I think the challenge for us now is, how we choose the right ones according to our values, and also how we scale that. Again, it's a big organisation, and scale can be quite challenging because it's also quite a federated organisation. So it's how we work through that, and again, how we adhere to our principles while exploring all these actually quite exciting things.
And where do you see the sort of, from what you've gathered over this last year, you mentioned 1 or 2 specific projects. Broadly speaking, where do you think the AI is going to start having a kind of impact on efficiency or innovation?
So I think at the moment we've been quite focused on productivity and efficiency, and I think we'll see that increase with time. But I think more interestingly, I think in the next year or so, what we'll see is much more focus on audience experiences and new experiences, some of which we probably haven't even thought of yet, but others we're seeing other people experiment with. So I think that's really, really interesting. And I also think we'll be able to experiment much more, much quicker, and just to discard things that don't work. So the beauty of AI, just being able to prototype very quickly, I think gives us a huge advantage. And I think the other thing we'll be probably talking about a bit more is what is the role of editors, and do they need different skills to the ones they have at the moment?
Yeah, exactly. Liz, again, the FT has been really pioneering, around digital generally, but especially around AI. You've got a kind of advantage in a sense in that your journalism is often about data, isn't it? It's about finance and figures and so on. So in a sense, it kind of lends itself naturally to the editorial mission of the news organisation. What's the kind of speed of travel in the last year for you?
Speed of travel. So I think similar to what Chris has been saying, what I'm seeing is the fluency across the board has been increasing, and that increases the speed as well. And what it means is kind of proliferation in a good sense. So as you say, editors, writers are already writing about it, already know a lot about it, the tech team as well. So there is a AI team that is part of my scope, but it's becoming more and more that all the teams in the product and tech are using AI, applying it. So I think what is going to happen next year, that probably there isn't going to be a product director with an AI in the title, which is me, but I'm completely fine with that and I support that. Because I think what we need is to stop thinking of it as a kind of one-off project, because we know it's going to stay, we know it's not going anywhere. And it's kind of, we've now figured out that also it's not just a feature set, it's not just a capability, it is all of those things. It's also an infrastructure, it's also a channel, it's a partner, it's a competitor, it's very many things that different parts of the business need to consider differently with their own expertise and their own approaches. So I think that's been quite crucial. And then again, similar to what Chris, you've been saying about building generative AI features and AI features in general, may not necessarily save us. What I think the shift for me has been this year to the same question. Last year I was answering, this is going to be the year of build versus buy. So we've tried building because we just needed to know what it's capable of, and now we need to start deciding where we buy because there are going to be providers. Next year, I think we really need to figure out build versus partner. And that is with AI platforms, what is exactly the new value chain split? What are we happy for them to start doing together with us? And like most of us have done some kind of version of summaries and translations, it's now increasingly being available on browsers. Do we need to build things on our websites? Yeah. Like we're so much slower than the tech companies. We probably just need to properly partner with them on those things. So where is that split? How do we figure that out? What is what we are bringing to the table as the...
I don't know how much you can talk about that, but broadly, that idea of partnership, how do you feel about that, and how do you envisage it working? Is it something formal that you're, it's now a relationship that you've got, or is it more ad hoc?
Many things I'm going to say is my personal opinion rather than that's the official, the disclaimer. So there are public deals that we've done, like with OpenAI, so that's not a secret. So I think the way, and also I think importantly, it's not the first deal for us that is an API integration in terms of us being paid for our content. So we've got B2B partners, they're already consuming our content through the API feeds. So it's not a completely new business model, it is slightly different. So we're trying to look at it slightly more holistically now, so that becomes more of a new channel and an increasing channel. So what do we need to do differently in our content platform, in the way we package our content, and even create our content in the newsroom, so that is more able to scale and brings us more revenue without sacrificing and challenging, like creating a competitor that is then going to kill us. So that's I think one point. And the other point that is much more my personal is that AI platform specifically is a source of younger audiences. And it's not a secret that a chunk of our churn is people getting old and dying, sorry. We all have very aging audiences. So we do need younger audiences, they're there. Yes, LLMs hallucinate, but also social media hallucinates like a lot. So can we figure that out with a proper partnership better than we did with social media, and just get them engaged through universities, through something that is meaningful, and then make them value the brand, value the curation, value the authority of our journalists through that.
Yeah, and thinking about that organisationally, I mean, in the past, news organisations have tended to sort of talk about, I don't know, news gathering, and then there was news production, and then there was this other bit called audiences, and that they were, in a sense, quite separate, literally separate departments. How does AI fit into that? Is that changing the way that you think about those different aspects, or are you still trying to separate it out? Because I mean, the title of this is very much focused on the journalist. It's saying, is AI going to become a co-author? Is that the only part of it?
So one thing, so I look after all the internal tools our journalists use as well. So one thing I'm vouching for as part of the strategy for the next 3 years is actually taking a step back and looking at our workflow. What is the newsroom doing more holistically? And trying to challenge whether the way the tasks are split, the jobs are figured out, like the scoped, is that tied to what technology was able of a couple of years, like 10 years ago actually, or is it actually how people work, how their profiles fit the scope? And if, like, what are the changes, what are the actual things we can change there and rebuild in a kind of like more radical way rather than incremental. Right now, honestly, we are focusing on within the existing jobs, can we do things better, either higher productivity or high quality. I think we're focusing a little bit more on quality and doing things we're normally not great at, like alt text. But I think in the future, I'd be super keen to see our roles potentially going to mix and match slightly different, even with the slight improvements that we're doing for revision and finding potential errors, millions, billions, mistakes. It is shifting much more to the writer right now because it is so much more embedded in the editor rather than at a separate step where someone goes and checks that. So already there is shifting workload and shifting roles between the newsroom jobs. So I think there's just going to be more of that, and I want to be intentional about it.
Right. Let's follow up on that and sort of get a little bit more granular in terms of, well, especially thinking perhaps about in the newsroom and for those journalists. Chris, what are the things that are working, and also, I guess, where is there a bit more friction? I mean, you told me about the Dan Sabat using AI to turn around very rapidly a high volume data story on the day, but you also talk about where some things haven't quite worked out.
Yeah, so I think Liz's point about build versus buy is something that's really occupied me. And actually, thinking about the biggest change this year, in some ways, I think it is the kind of, through integration, the increasing democratization of this technology in very banal ways, which will actually make the biggest difference to most people's lives.
Right.
So the training that we released was tied to the fact that we have approved Gemini internally for everyone, right? And Gemini in Workspace. Now, there will obviously be a bunch of journalists, it's probably focused in visuals, data journalism and investigations, who start chaining together really interesting things because they have to in interrogating data sets. But most journalists are probably going to be using this stuff embedded in a word processor, right? Some people's lives will be changed by, I don't know, Google Slides now. When you drop an image in, there's a little button that pops up saying remove background. Totally banal, massively useful, won't be considered Gen AI. Right? So a big part of writing, and the reason that it, to a certain extent, we as The Guardian have avoided building tools like Brainstorm Simulator or, you know, helping you structure your article, is because I think that's going to take place more effectively in Google Docs than it will do in internal tools that we build. And that comes back to measuring impact as well, right? It's really hard to measure the impact of a bunch of integrations, which include things like fuzzy search in Gmail. That's massively useful. If the title of this was I don't know, on research, I think basically we're there, right? It's incredibly helpful to have this technology in search. Right. Notebook LM, what's not to like, especially as a journalist? You know, nobody really needs to explain it. You know, it's great. You don't have to keyword search for things through a massive PDF anymore. Marvelous. So I do think that's the bit that's important for me. Most people's lives are going to be, you know, integrating this stuff in that way, not whether or not we build a very elaborate workflow or add, you know, big things in. But I think writing is a very personal thing, and that's the other thing, right? So boring story, I guess, but Simon Hattenston, brilliant interviewer of ours, came to me and said, I'm really worried, I'm a Luddite, I don't use any of this technology, I don't even use transcription. And would you have a chat with me? So my first question was obviously, why the hell don't you use it for transcription? The one thing everybody can agree is a marvelous thing about this technology. And, you know, he said, well, when I transcribe my interview by hand for that 2-day process, that's the period in which I'm structuring how I'm going to write this piece, right? And at that point you say, please never use this for transcription. You know, this is about a personal decision about where it fits into your natural workflow, I think, rather than us three going, hey writers, this is the way you should work with it. Sorry, that was very long-winded, but I guess I'm trying to say this is, I think, more organic.
Yeah.
You know, there is something here where this stuff will start to naturally come through. And right now, I think those integrations are proving to people who have previously been worried about it that there are things that can help them.
And is the sort of pushback or the friction just a natural kind of working through of what is effective, or is there still a sort of element of fear and loathing around the tech?
Yeah. So we did a staff survey, and 50% of our staff said the Guardian's moving at about the right pace. 25% said we were moving too slowly, and 25% said we were moving too fast.
Right.
I was quite pleased with that, if I'm honest.
Yeah.
I think that's quite good, and I think quite a few other news orgs have similar kind of numbers around that. You know, it is worrying. You know, it's threatening. It's disturbing. My personal view is, if I was still a sub, I would be using this in interesting ways to make my job easier, and I think there are ways you can use it. Whilst at the same time, I think extended use of it also proves that a sub-editor or a human being who is responsible for some of the decisions we make is going to be one of the things that we can stand up over the next few years and say, this is something that makes us distinct from that.
Right.
Doesn't necessarily mean that we're going to always be more accurate. But one thing we can say is we have human beings who are responsible for it. We are accountable to you in provable ways.
Yeah. And Nathalie, with the BBC, obviously you're huge, and there's so many diverse bits, even the news department alone, obviously. There are so many different programs, so many different services, you know, international, domestic, etc., so many different languages, you said, and I think the Polish one is a really interesting, if you roll that out to other languages,
Yeah.
it's very exciting. How does it work, though, in practice? Again, that sort of granular thing. How do you keep track of that feedback about what works and what doesn't? And what, again, let's talk about if there are worries or things that are a bit more frictional.
I think the way we do it is we're very deliberate about how we go about things, and you know, maybe in some senses we're slower than the FT, for example. So we roll out pilots and we really go in and look at where the friction is, for example, or where the problems are. So we've had, you know, a very successful pilot that's about to be integrated into our CMS and rolled out more widely, which is around our local democracy reporting.
Right.
And basically, there are 150 reporters across the country. They don't file in BBC style. So using a BBC LLM, we've kind of given them the ability to pipe straight into the CMS, and the LLM does the first pass at putting it into BBC style and comes up with some suggestions or flags up some issues. And that's been really successful, and the accuracy rates are quite high. We did a separate trial around summarization with a commercial tool. It was less successful, and partly was friction, because it wasn't integrated properly, but it was also partly, I think, people were quite concerned about accuracy. Not that it was massively inaccurate, they were just concerned that they had to check so much that I think the worry added some time to it. So we're going to go back and revisit it. So again, I think everything we roll out, we do it quite small scale, test it first internally, then test it with small audiences, and that's the way we're doing it, which, you know,
yeah,
is slow, but it reassures both the newsroom and us.
Yeah. And everyone says, look, keep the human or the expert in the loop, which sounds nice, but obviously that means you've got a human who's spending their time in that loop, isn't it?
But I think yes, we do need humans in every loop. But again, I think this is why it's interesting once we move beyond that and you have more personalization and you have, if you want more kind of liquid content, then the editor can't be across everything. So how do you do it?
Yeah, and with the democracy one, which is fascinating, do you think that's something that could spread beyond that particular cohort of journalists?
I would hope we would look at doing things like style guide. We have a very, very, very long style guide, and integrating that seems like quite an obvious step. And it's also the style guide itself is, I would say, quite a high barrier to entry for people who've never written before, for example. And we're a broadcast organisation. We have lots of people who have vast experience in video and audio, but not that much in writing. It's useful.
Yeah. And just quickly on your journalists are, how can I put this politely, notoriously expert, and they're very proud of their domain knowledge and their expertise around a certain beat and their high standards and so on. Is that a good thing when it comes to try to get them to use AI?
Well, we are not trying, none of us are trying to replace the expertise with AI, right? So I think there was a worry about that could be an option a couple of years ago, but since then, I think lots of conversations have been had, lots of people have started using AI. We've introduced some tools that show that the direction we're traveling is different. So what we are trying to do is making that expertise more visible. So I guess, like, again, coming back to the AI platforms, in summaries on Google, it's very factual. It doesn't need deep expertise to get an answer to a quick question on Google. How do we make sure that people still come to us for expertise? Well, where is that link? So I think that's one thing to figure out. And then also helping our experts to create more of what they're good at and removing some of the tedious stuff, but also making things more viable, I guess. So to your question of what works well, investigative journalism, obviously, like it's a massive source of free traffic for us because it's always very viral, very popular among readers. So the more we can help find the needle in the haystack, the better. So that team is still very, very successful. And then similarly, even for beat reporting, I guess, the thing we did with the recommended wires, where the feed of wires gets shortened to what you as a writer should care about, that shortens the time between the news going out and us publishing it on the FT. Again, helps us get more traffic from search because it's when people are searching for it. So the faster it's there, the more people we get. Yeah. So helping with that and helping also with the other steps of the journey that are not related to writing as much. So all the editing, multimedia, things around writing, I guess, is but also the writing itself when it comes to the style and things like that. So that's what we are focusing on. So I don't think there is a conflict between, it's actually the opposite.
And in terms of your audience, obviously the FT is subscription, and you've got a very, what's the word? People pay a lot for it.
Yeah.
And they expect a lot, your readers expect a lot, and they also bring a lot to it in terms of their own experience and expertise. Are you able to exploit that? Is that something that can feed into your use of AI?
So there are two parts of it. One is what's working not as well, I would say, or like a challenge, is people pay a lot, and whenever they see an AI disclaimer, that erodes the trust and the feeling of like AI in journalism equals cheap. So we're very careful in terms of what we do with those, where we put that, like if the content has been through human review, do we really need to put in the disclaimer that AI at some point has been used in the process? Or the responsibility is on the writer, on the journalist, on the FT now, so we shouldn't really muddle that with a disclaimer, because the disclaimers do really erode the trust. And then if we do something that is no human in the loop, again, we're trying to be very careful with it. It both needs to be very high quality, so we put a lot of effort into the prompting, testing, but also needs to bring enough engagement uplift for us to just keep that and counter people who are going to come back to us and say, oh, are you now changing to an AI written journalism? I'm going to stop paying you a subscription. We had a couple of those, which is, fair expected. So that's, I guess, one side of it. The other side is what you said about readers bringing something to the table, and our community is amazing. Our readers who use comments are 6 times more engaged, but only 60% know that comments exist, which is ridiculous. Right. So we've used AI to actually drive people more into the comments, and the audience engagement team reviews a question that is generated by an LLM based on the article and is trying to spark a discussion. And that question is then posted two-thirds through the article length, and then takes you to the comments. So that increased comment rate by 3.5%, which is quite significant given how much more they're engaged. So so I think there is the positive to it as well, and we're trying to see what else can we do in terms of engagement with comments with AI.
Yeah. Nathalie, very quickly on that as well, you mentioned that you've got guidelines, et cetera, that transparency around AI to your users must be quite a delicate balance, isn't it? that you want to be honest with your public service broadcaster, you want to be honest about how you do your journalism, but you also don't want to suggest that suddenly you've thrown it all to the robots.
Yeah, our head of responsible AI is in the back, so
Indeed,
be careful what I say.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
We do discuss it a lot, and both the wording, and we try to be very descriptive about what we do, so it's very clear which bits have been AI has assisted with, but also we discuss the placement. And again, we do disclose everything, so whether it's assistance with translation, assistance with summarization, it is all disclosed, but I also think it will change over time as it becomes
people become used to the idea that it's part
and we know there are big differences generationally between acceptance of AI, and I think over time it'll just become, and you'd expect people to translate with AI because that's what people do normally when they're on holiday.
Yeah.
So I think that will change, but yeah.
Yeah, and Chris, your readers again. Notoriously sensitive, and ethical, of course.
Yeah. I mean, I think one of the most interesting things about guidelines is, to a certain extent, if you look at the Guardian's editorial code, which is public, if you apply everything that's already in there, ignoring the AI clause in there, that gives a pretty good approach to dealing with generative AI as a thing when you're a journalist, right? In exactly the same way that a journalist wouldn't go to an unknown website, read that the world was flat, and then write that down, check your source, right? Like a huge amount of existing journalistic practice, ethics, and standards should moderate sensibly this new technology. So a lot of our guidelines, internally I'm working, I'm moving from desk to desk, because that's the other thing, right? It's a big job,
right?
New things coming out all the time. But for example, I'm going to the audio team and talking about whether the new tools that are coming through in terms of production should affect our existing guidelines. Brackets, do we already have actually written down existing guidelines? There's something quite good and hygienic about this as an object which forces you to look at whether or not you're already kind of clear about these things. But time and again, when I'm talking to those teams, often we come back to the same thing, which is if you apply basic good journalistic standards, that is a good way to navigate your way through this particular issue.
Yes, exactly. So I would like to throw it out to the audience. If you've got any questions to these three, or if you want to raise anything, hands up, please. Let's start at the front.
Morning all. Hi, Dimitri, I'm consultant and advisor. Question to all of you very quickly, if I can. If you were to select one new trait that you specifically pay attention to when hiring new people, when bringing people in, so I'm not talking about competencies because they will be changing and skills will be changing, but specifically the character trait of a person who you would like to hire. So how would you be thinking about this? Thank you.
If it were up to me, it'd probably be just curiosity, but I again would argue that's a pretty good journalistic trait, right?
Yeah, I think exactly the same, but probably the other way to say that is courage as well.
Mm-hmm.
So,
right.
Because, I think they come kind of hand.
I add to that just willing to test things themselves. Actually, curiosity leads to action in their own consumption.
I mean, this is one of the things that's changed, I've noticed. I mean, the shift to Gen AI. Prior to that, if we talked about AI and you were hiring somebody to do AI in your newsroom, they probably would be a tech person.
Yeah.
They would perhaps know how to code. They would certainly know a lot about algorithms and so on. Gen AI has kind of changed that, hasn't it? Yeah.
Although, having a data scientist on hand at all times pretty helpful.
It's always nice. Yeah, exactly. Another question, please. Should we go right to the back there?
Good morning, everyone. Atandua here from Code for Africa in South Africa. I've got a question about frameworks. I work with a couple of newsrooms across the continent around the AI and thinking around it and their strategies. And frameworks, cool. AI frameworks within the newsrooms and how they think about AI. My first question, I guess, to any panel member, because you guys run amazing, huge newsrooms, do we expect the journalists to actually read the guidelines? Or are they, I kid you not, do we expect them to read them because, oh, they're guidelines and it's more documents that they have to kind of get through? Or are there like processes in place for them to integrate it into their work? And how are we actually checking if they are actually engaging with those particular guidelines? And the second question would be, Chris, you mentioned that you ran some research around the actual use of artificial intelligence within newsrooms, and you mentioned something around 50%. Just to take a couple of steps back, during the time of social media, 50% was a very high number for people in the newsroom to be using this new kind of technology and platform. Are we really seeing 50% of people in the newsrooms actually engaging with the tools that are being brought within the newsrooms? What are the actual numbers within those newsrooms? Are we still getting that sense that people are still quite afraid of engaging with the new technologies and platforms within our newsrooms as well?
So on that second point, the number I quoted earlier was the 50% of people at The Guardian felt that we were moving at about the right pace. But one of the survey questions we asked, and one of the reasons we brought Gemini in and the training, was we asked people how many people were using personal LLMs to carry out work, and unsurprisingly, that was quite high, right? Again, we're not just talking about whether somebody uses it, we're talking about the extent of use too, right? And today, right now, every single Guardian journalist has used an LLM in research by going to Google search, right? Of course, that's kind of, I'm not being facetious. I mean, that's the reality we're now in. I think your first question is such a brilliant one, and it is something I'm super interested in, and it's super boring. And it's partly because I've done quite a lot of cultural change work over the years around data and audience and content reduction. And broadly speaking, and I can only speak about The Guardian, but I feel like I can speak about, from talking to peers, I think most newsrooms are not set up to support cultural change projects. We're really bad at it. I mean, one of the things, it's not only our responsibility to, for example, give people some mandatory training, it's our responsibility to say, how much time are we asking them to spend on it, and is it worth it? And also, are we giving them the time to step away from the news desk, where there's always an excuse to be there, right? So, yeah, I think your point is really important, and it strikes something more fundamental and much less sexy than talking about AI as a co-author. It's, do you have the things in place to support your newsroom in times of change and give them the time to engage with this stuff? In terms of tracking stuff, I'm so sorry, I was just going to quickly say we are not asking all of our newsroom to tell us, we're not tracking their use of this either.
That would be virtually impossible anyway, wouldn't it? Yeah. Guidelines.
I mean, guidelines, yeah. I mean, we do mandatory training, and obviously everyone's done it, and then you find that people have completely forgotten it because they have very busy lives. So it's a complicated balance. But for example, we had an internal AI week last week, or the week before, and actually what it does is it generates that enthusiasm, and there was huge. I mean, I was surprised about how much engagement there was, and people going to lots of sessions and making time and going back to the recordings. And I think sometimes that's much more useful as a way to get those guidelines, kind of get people to remember them and understand them, than forcing mandatory training. I think training is important, but I think you need to reinforce it and keep reinforcing it until it just becomes, people know the rest of the editorial guidelines largely, so that just needs to become part of it. And I think we're not quite there yet, but I think we'll get there.
And it's trying to shift, isn't it, from the idea of guidelines as a kind of something that you refer to when things go wrong, as opposed to just really guiding, as in, how should I behave? Which
largely people know about everything else except AI, I think.
Yeah, exactly.
So first disclaimer, I don't run a newsroom, so I'm in the product side of things, and in technology we do love a framework. So my favorite one for the culture change and change in general is COM model. And that's capability, opportunity, and motivations, very similar to what you were saying both, are we offering the tools for people to behave differently? Are we giving them the opportunity, meaning time, for instance, or even space, physical? or coaching, something like that. And then the motivation, I guess, is the critical one, and that's what we were struggling with a couple of years ago when people were scared that if they engage, they're going to work themselves out of their jobs. So what is the positive thing? What are they working towards? Why do they need to engage? What are they creating? Are they creating free time? Are they creating more interesting work? So figuring that out, I think, might be more important for the system to be self-sustainable rather than controls that need to be enforced and kind of be an industry of enforcement.
So what's COM again?
Capability, opportunity, motivation, similar to figuring out a murder. So you have the tool, the murder weapon, you don't have an alibi, and you have the motive. So that's how I remembered it.
That's excellent. I really like that one, yeah. I'm going to take a couple of questions now. The gentleman here in the blue, can we just quickly, and then in the ginger.
Yes, I'm Jim Carney from, I teach journalism in the Bronx in New York City.
Good luck.
And not getting specific here, but in general, and Chris, you addressed this about what should we teach students coming out of college? Not necessarily specific tools, but you talked about attitude towards it or philosophy towards it that you would look for in looking for new young students coming into journalism.
Okay, there's one on that, and then
Ulrike Langer, I'm a freelance media innovation journalist, and I was a bit surprised when you were asked what traits are you looking for, that you came up with these timeless adjectives like curiosity. None of you said product thinking, someone who enhances audience engagement, someone who increases our diversity, and that makes me wonder, is this because you all work in these huge newsrooms and you don't need the agility, or why?
okay, that two brilliantly chosen questions. They are related.
In terms of education, I started out as a primary school teacher, so it kind of matters to me a lot. And I think one of the interesting things about AI as a tool, there is obviously a huge concern about how this is going to disrupt kind of education, right? And I was at a thing in Phoenix a few weeks back where somebody said, I just don't understand why these kids would use this tool to write a whole essay. I just don't, what is wrong with these kids? And I was a bit like, if I'd been out for drinks the night before an essay deadline 30 odd years ago, I'd have used it to write a thing, right? But what's exciting about it is it's an amazing educative tool, AI. It's phenomenal. The options there are extraordinary. I think it's one of the things that it's best at. So, to tie it to that, why did I choose curiosity? Because I've met incurious product people. I've met incurious journalists. I don't think, I think the generic fundamental things are what is helpful here, because I don't think we should be considering this in some ways as something special, right? I mean, it's new, it's different, but fundamentally, it's not that different from when the internet came out and sensible people went, I think this is really interesting and I should experience it and play with it. In terms of diversity, I obviously agree, but one would hope that that is part of a natural hiring process. Is that fair?
Yeah, I mean, just to add to that, I think it's not about the size of the newsroom, and it obviously will depend on the role, and this is kind of a very generic answer. But I think your point about audience engagement, for example, that you need to start asking the question, how are audiences engaging? That is your starting point. And I've interviewed many people who are like, well, we do this, therefore this works. I'm like, that is the wrong starting point. And I think you can train people in lots of things, and they can learn things on the job. That is one thing that if you don't come with it, you're probably not going to get it.
Yeah, very similar. So I think much easier to train hard skills, attitudes, not so. And to the younger people joining the workforce, I guess less journalists, I don't know that career ladder, but in tech, what we're all seeing is there are fewer junior jobs because of AI, because companies tend to, economic pressures as well, companies tend to try and outsource that to AI where possible. What is possible for people is to come into a slightly less junior role now. So companies are rethinking actually what is our lowest role, rather than it being a very manual assistant. It already includes some judgment. So using the AI and doing some kind of judgment-laden job. So teaching the judgment, teaching to decision making, and how to be kind of closer to the business and the essence of the job straight away, rather than needing to engage with the content in an automated systematic way first is something really helpful for people to be successful, I think.
It's really interesting. Very quickly, here's to another couple, one in the middle, the lady there in the jumper. Well, you're in a jumper, that doesn't narrow it down much, does it? But the stripy jumper there you can do, yeah. And take another one over there, please. Just to keep you all running around with the mics. Yeah, over there, Lakshmi. Man with a hat. So go ahead, far away.
Hi, this is Olaya Novoa. I'm from Prisa Media in Spain, and I have two questions. One is, from The Guardian, you said that you just approved Gemini for the whole newsrooms to use. I was wondering if there's any other tool that you have kind of like approved for any of the newsrooms, not just for one, newsroom-wise, and on the other side is, I understand that that is just for like general use, for training and so forth. But from what you've said, I understand there are like two speeds. One would be just to integrate the use of AI maybe on the regular workflows. And the other part for me important would be innovation. It's like, how do you support innovation? Do you have any kind of sandbox? Have you created any kind of space where people who are curious enough can go and try? How does that work in your newsrooms?
Really good questions, please.
Right. Can you hear me? Oh, great. My name is Maiwa. I'm a journalist and researcher. So my questions are on two sides. First one is for Liz, which is like thinking about product-wise. Now, you probably have existing customers who already drawn your API over the years before the proliferation of AI. Now, those kind of customers who have access to years and years of your stories, if they were to build a niche product based off your stories, is that something that they would need to come to you again for fresh permissions, right, or do the existing contracts, which did not take AI into account, cover for that kind of situation? That's one. Then for Chris and Nathalie, I'm talking about the skills shifts. Now, when you join a newsroom like The Guardian or the BBC, you spend considerable time learning the house style, how to write for the BBC. But now, if you build that style guide into an AI system, do new journalists within your newsroom still spend that amount of time or that kind of time learning how to use the house style? Or do you think that that's the kind of skill that we would no longer need into the future?
Mm-hmm. Really good questions.
Excellent.
Just quickly pick any, we're running out of time, so be brief.
Quickly on Style Guide, Style Guide used to be a book, right? And I remember when we put it on the web, a lot of sub-editors were worried that that would mean that they were out of a job. It didn't, right? It just went on the web. And now the next step should be, drop it into Notebook LM or wherever so you can ask questions of it. And maybe you build a tool, you attempt to build a tool which kind of forces that onto the text, but I'm not entirely sure that we're interested in that in particular. I like the suggestion kind of approach. But I don't think it invalidates it. I just think there are new ways of using it.
Nathalie, any of those?
Yeah, I'm really interested in Style Guide as well, but I think there's a lot of, like, you don't need to occupy a memory with whether we use an S or a Z in certain words. I honestly don't think we need that. But I do think there's something interesting is, do we as journalists need to understand better what facts and what data needs to go into a story for it to appear in a certain way in an AI assistant, for example. And I think that's much more worthwhile time spent think about that than actually the Style Guide, which to an extent you can automate.
Liz, on the sandbox type?
Yeah, as a sandbox, we have built what we call AI playground. It's an internal tool that connects to an LLM and allows to play around with the prompts, basically exactly what it says, based on our content. So it pulls in either a specific article, or you can search with the brag search for segments and then do something with them. And that's how we actually decided which features to try. Some of the timeline stuff people tried on it, so editorial teams tried it, was quite rubbish at the time, so we pivoted into a single article summarization. So that's what we encourage people to use, and alongside actually ChatGPT. So similar to Gemini, the newsroom has ChatGPT. We also don't disencourage using that for experimentation. But it's less visibility for us, unfortunately.
I love the idea of FT people in a playground.
Yeah.
Just a charming image there. Thank you very much for those questions. They're all brilliant. And thank you three for kicking us off in such a fantastic way. Thank you all very, very much.
Thank you.